Yoni, when your flight landed in Israel shortly after October 7, what was your first priority in terms of reporting? What did you want to do first?
I wanted to go straight to the border. Every reporter wants to go straight to the front line. But to me, the absolute imperative was getting to the nerve center, the ground zero of where October 7 actually occurred. So I wanted to get inside the kibbutzim. That wasn't possible in the first 8 days that I was in Israel. It took about 8 days. And at the time, it felt like a lifetime trying to get into the kibbutz of Kfar Aza, where I eventually was able to access, and which had a very severe impact on me and on my reporting moving forward. It was very important for me to get there and to see the surroundings of what had actually occurred on October 7. And I think, our political leadership would have probably benefited from doing the same. I'm thinking right now of our Foreign Minister Penny Wong, who went to Israel, which was a very good thing as part of a broader tour of the Middle East, but for reasons which aren't entirely clear, did not go to the kibbutzim. I think there's much to be learned from going there. But the immediate priority was getting to the kibbutzim. But I think we've discussed this before. In the first few days of arriving, it wasn't a simple matter of getting down there. You needed to get in with IDF access. It was a closed military zone. There was an enormous amount of paranoia and righteous fear over the fact that there were Hamas agents who'd come across the border on October 7, but hadn't actually gone back or hadn't been neutralized by the IDF. So even once I got down there, I remember I was standing by the side of the road near Kfar Aza, and I was standing at a junction area, like a staging point, and it took an extra half an hour to get inside because there was a security sweep being done of the village, because there was a rumor or some kind of intelligence that had come through that there was still the possibility of sleeper agents who were hiding inside the very houses that the IDF had thought they had cleared. And this was just a reoccurring problem for weeks and weeks and weeks. It honestly took about 2.5 months before the south could officially be reopened again and declared a non-military zone. But I guess I'll finish the answer by saying that in the intervening period, before I was able to get down there, I needed to find something to do. So every day I'd be calling you up and saying, well, I hear all these Israelis are going and getting gun licenses now, because everyone wants a gun all of a sudden. And I'd be wondering if that would be a story, and you'd be ringing the alarm saying, get to a gun range right now.
Yeah, there were lots of conversations where you said, I'm noticing this. Is this a story? And all I really had to do was say, yes, that's a story. Go and do it.
The sentence wouldn't even be finished, and I'd be in the car with the photographer. Those were certainly my first impressions on arriving.
Yeah. Talking about that gun range, it was within a very few days that you heard that normal Israelis were arming themselves with either more ammunition, more guns, getting gun licenses for the first time, renewing a license that had lapsed long ago, and you went to a rifle range, and there you met someone you described memorably as the John Farnham of Israel.
The John, I don't know if anyone in the audience is old enough or familiar enough with Yoram Gaon, who is a very well-known Israeli singer-actor. He's exactly he's a bit like Bert Newton. This guy can do anything. But we likened him at the time to John Farnham, and I was standing at a rifle range in the area of Herzliya, and I was standing around with my photographer, and I'm not familiar with every famous Israeli person or people with great profile, but I was standing there outside. I thought the job was over. I was about to leave, and the person with me nudged me and basically said, "You need to go and talk to that stooped old man over there right this minute." I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because that's Yoram Gaon." And we went over and we discussed it with him. Now, Yoram Gaon, apart from the fact that there's a novelty in seeing a famous person on the street, whether it's in LA or Tel Aviv or wherever, Yoram Gaon is 86 years old. And that should tell you something about the climate that Israel was facing in the days after October 7th. Here's an 86-year-old man. He already had a weapon. He was at the gun range. Obviously, I wanted to know what he was doing and how he felt. And he said he was buying more bullets because he was very concerned about eruptions along the West Bank border. And that is something that I think may get lost in some of the telling of what was going on after October 7. Everyone seems to think that the war was happening in Gaza. It certainly was, and still is. And there's every risk of a war unfolding in the north with Hezbollah. That's an ever-present threat. It could blow up any minute. But there's another front that people don't tend to talk about very often, and that's the West Bank. And the West Bank has been quiet, and thankfully through good relations of one kind or another, or perhaps it's just good security climate, there hasn't been an incident. There have been counter-terrorism operations and precision operations to prevent any kind of counterinsurgency. But that is a very real threat. And that was largely the reason why Israelis were arming themselves up in the days after October 7. The threat was that ordinary Arab civilians living in the West Bank would decide to stage a secondary insurrection in response to October 7th. Thankfully, it didn't happen, but still a risk.
One of the things you saw at Yoni and reported on from that kibbutz was the punctured safe rooms, the safe rooms that were full of blood, where people had tried to shelter and found that they, in fact, weren't safe. What was your observation of what that has done to the Israeli psyche, that safe rooms turned out to not be safe, that the nation of Israel turned out to not be the safe haven that many might have hoped that it was? What's that done to Israelis?
It's funny. I think the person who put it in the wording that I prefer most is a fiction writer by the name of Edgar Keret. He's a famous Israeli fiction writer. He's just absolutely wonderful. If you haven't heard of him, you should go out and read everything he's ever written. He's great. Edgar Keret was retelling the story of October 7, and he said that for a very long period of time in Israel, and perhaps not everyone in this room is aware of it, while the events were unfolding, and they unfolded from about 6:30 in the morning, there was a real lack of information that was being imparted to the Israeli public on the news. Most of the news of what was happening in the kibbutzim in the south was coming from people inside their safe rooms. There weren't government spokespeople. The IDF was missing in action, I'm afraid to say. And so much of that information was coming from ordinary people who were saying, there are terrorists in my village, where's the army, where are the police, I can't find family members of mine, etc., etc. And Edgar Keret quite wisely and very incisively said that we were learning all of our information from inside those safe rooms, and in a sense the entire country had become a safe room. We were all in the safe room with those people. So when I went to Kfar Aza, I actually saw what the safe rooms looked like, and this was another very telling and very disturbing aspect to confront of October 7. It's that you walk through a village like Kfar Aza. It's a beautiful village, it's stunning, peaceful, painted bicycles, swaying eucalyptus trees, there were palm trees. It's the kind of place you want to live. It's really, really nice. And you walk in and then suddenly there'll be glass crunching underfoot, and there'll be a car sprayed with bullets, and you can smell the death inside the car. And I remember one car in particular, it had those little screens on the back for the kids. These are the small sort of things that stay with you. But when you get to the houses, some of them are untouched. I remember that one of the doors was open, and I think I sent you some photographs of this as well, because I was really shocked by it. You'd see parts of the village that had just been decimated, and then you'd see a house that was completely untouched. It was as though the people inside had just stepped out for 5 minutes to do something. But one thing that you really noticed about the houses that were attacked and affected was that they were looted. They looked terrible. But the houses themselves were structurally sound. The only part that wasn't was the safe room, because a thermobaric grenade had been thrown inside. And a thermobaric grenade will raise the temperature inside a room to about 3,000 degrees and just obliterate everything that's there. So there's nothing left after you throw a grenade like that.
And with the safe rooms, I think, Yoni, that was how a lot of people here in Australia heard about it unfolding, because their relatives, their cousin or whatever was in a safe room. And so people here in Melbourne were just getting horrific progressive messages. And really that was the way that the community here in Melbourne and across Australia heard about it as well.
And imagine finding out in those terms. I mean, the stories of how people found out what was happening on October 7. I don't need to repeat all of them. I'm sure everyone in this room is well familiar with what went on, but it impacts you as a person to visit a village like Kfar Aza or Be'eri or Nahal Oz or any of the sites where the army had to work for days and days to reclaim these villages back from the terrorists who'd crossed the border and got inside.
Cam, you've spent a career reporting on defence, security, the big geopolitical shifts. One of the things that I think shocked many people in the world was that the famous Mossad and the famous Israeli Defence Forces had not been able to prevent or anticipate this attack. What was your reaction to that as someone who spent a long time covering these things?
To be honest, it was disbelief. It was just disbelief. I mean, Mossad, the intelligence services of Israel, are phenomenal usually, and I couldn't help but think it was in part due to a complacency, maybe even a political complacency to a degree, just thinking that what actually did happen wouldn't happen, the belief that border, that fence was actually much better and more reliable, robust sort of border than everyone thought. I can only guess, added to the complacency, of course, the actual day, I think it was a holiday, wasn't it? So it was, that would have certainly added to it as well. But I think it's an astonishing fact that there was nothing picked up, which just shows probably that Hamas, surprisingly, was very, very, very careful and fairly primitive and basic in some of their training. But
I think that's
I'll
your
just-
fault, Yoni. I'm blaming you for that.
Oh, sorry.
Whatever is happening.
there we go. Thanks. But look, it's a great question, and of course it's one that Benjamin Netanyahu will probably be toppled as a result. I would suspect if that's the case, because you would imagine that would be a huge black mark against him when an election comes up.